Plastic bottles. Millions get thrown away every single day.
Big factories can recycle them, but for DIY makers like us, it's an absolute nightmare material.
Unlike HDPE, which melts and moulds beautifully, PET bottles simply cannot be worked in the same way.
But what if we told you there was a way to take this waste and turn it into a material with endless possibilities? Something that can be turned into just about anything. Well, before we dive into how this all works, let's show you how we got here.
This all started about a year ago with a guy named Igor. A friend of ours had told us about his company, Tylman Designs, and how Igor had developed the PETmachine, a 3D printable version of a bottle pultruder that's easy to assemble and perfect for beginners. We'll explain what all of that means in just a sec.
And his goal was simple, to make PET plastic more accessible and fun, kind of like Lego for engineering. Naturally, we were immediately intrigued.
So we reached out to Igor to find out if we could collaborate in some way to show you how to recycle PET at home. And luckily, he was super keen.
Hey Igor, how's it going? We hopped on a call and it was just clear that we had to make something happen.
Igor was 100% in, and we agreed that he would fly over to visit our workshop so that he could come and spend a few days teaching us everything we needed to know about PET recycling. So I'm on the way to the airport to pick up Igor, but on the way I'm going to pick up some plastic bottles. A neighbour of ours has been collecting some for us, and hopefully that gives us a bit more material to play with. After about a year of chatting and planning, we finally got Igor in our workshop with us. And of course, we are very excited to get started and take a look at all of Igor's machines. And this is the star of the show, his PETmachine.
It's been cleverly designed so that most of it can be 3D printed at home, and then Igor can just send out the essential parts like the electronic and mechanical components, or it can just come as a ready-to-go, fully assembled machine. We'll of course put links down below for you to find them.
But before we fire it up and start making our beautiful recycled filament, we need to prep all of our bottles. We've been collecting bottles for a little while now, and essentially the bigger the bottle, the better. Regardless of the size of bottle you choose, it takes about the same amount of time to get it ready for turning into filament, but where a 500ml bottle will create about 2 meters of filament, a 5 litre bottle will create about 20 meters. So that's just something to keep in the back of your mind when you're collecting bottles.
So, how do we get this onto here?
First of all, you have to get rid of those grooves from the bottle.
Will it work for that?
Of course.
First things first, we need to inflate the bottle using a special valve. This is really easy to attach by drilling a hole into the lid, screwing the whole thing together, and then putting that lid back on the bottle. To inflate it, we're using our air compressor, but you could also use something like a bike pump.
More. Okay.
You'll know it's ready once it feels pretty solid and it makes this nice pinging sound.
Then we need to make the surface of the bottle nice and smooth. Now you can do this by pouring boiling water over the bottle, which works absolutely fine, but we're going to chuck it up in our drill and slowly rotate it over a heat gun set on a fairly low setting.
Yeah, you should focus on this
On the middle bit.
neck here.
Oh yeah, look.
As you do this, you can slowly see all the grooves and bumps in the bottle slowly expanding and giving you a nice flat surface.
So as you can see, big difference.
And this is an extremely satisfying step. Here you can see just how much difference that heat gun makes. The next step is a really important one, and you have to remove any glue residue that was left over by the label or anything else that was stuck onto the bottle. If you don't do this and there's glue residue left on the bottle when you're turning it into filament, or even in your 3D printer and it's printing your object, then it can clog up the nozzle and bad things can happen. The best way to do this is to use a little bit of acetone on a cloth and it wipes off super easy.
Oh, there you
Oh,
go.
going
There you go.
like a dream.
Nice.
Now it's time to deflate the bottle so that we can cut the bottom off. You want this cut to be nice and flat, so you can go back and trim up your cut line with scissors afterwards if you need to, just like we're doing here. Then we need to cut a super narrow strip at the bottom so that it can pass through the nozzle of the extruder on the PET machine. All bottles have different wall thicknesses, so things like fizzy drinks will need to have a thicker wall than something that contains an uncarbonated drink. So using our calipers, we can see this bottle is about 0.23, 0.24 millimeters thick.
And Igor's got this handy little table which tells you if your wall thickness is around 0.25, then you need to feed it through slot 8, which will cut it into an 8mm strip through the machine. So once your bottle is up on the machine and you've fed it through slot number 8, you can pull around 10 centimeters through and you can see that it's cutting an 8mm ribbon of plastic out of your PET bottle.
Now it's best to pass it through the nozzle while it's still cool, because once it gets hot, the plastic can shrink and pull away from it. And now we've done all that prep work, we are ready to get this machine going.
We've set the temperature to 210 degrees Celsius, which is just the right temperature to reform that plastic into a cylindrical hollow filament. Once the machine's at about 100 degrees, it's a good idea just to pull a little bit more through with some pliers, otherwise the plastic can shrink away and you have to start the whole process again.
Now it's up to temperature, pull it through the nozzle a little further and cut the plastic to give you a nice clean start to the filament.
Next, you need to pass the string down and around the roll on the side of the machine and then underneath the spool. Then you can attach it to your newly formed piece of filament and tighten the screw to lock it in place.
Now we're ready to get PET machining. We're starting off slow to get it going, but once the filament reaches the spool, we can speed things up.
Once it's up and running, it will make about 1 meter of filament per minute. You can go faster than this, but you might notice a slight decrease in quality of the filament overall.
And at this point, you can leave this little beauty to do its thing. It does make a fun little squeaky noise as the plastic gets pulled through the cutter, but if you're not a fan of this, then Igor has another method which we'll show you later on. But we quite like it.
There's also this handy little run out sensor which detects when the plastic has run out and turns everything off automatically, which leaves you free to start prepping more plastic bottles. But realistically, we're probably going to sit here and just watch the whole process because it's very satisfying.
So our bottle has now been turned into this lovely roll of filament. It's time to give it a test run on the 3D printer. And as with any good 3D printing project, we're starting off with a benchy just to make sure everything's dialed in before we move on to some bigger and more exciting things. For this, we're using the Bambu Lab P1S, which they kindly sent us for this project. It's built on the same mechanical structure as their flagship X1 Carbon, which means you get awesome reliability and print stability.
Now, recycled PET filament does have the tendency to be a little bit slippy, so the fact that this machine has got a dual gear feeding system helps a lot because it means it's going to reduce the risk of any failures and keeps the print nice and smooth. Which is also good considering how much love has gone into making all of this filament. The other good thing about the P1S is that it's fully enclosed, which is really good for the recycled PET as it needs a little bit more temperature control to make it work properly. It's also got the automatic material system on top, the AMS, which means we could make filament in loads of different colours, in clears and blues and greens, and then have full control over everything we want to print.
Bambu Lab are celebrating their 3rd anniversary right now, and they've got the biggest discounts they've ever done with up to 40% off their printers. So we'll drop a link below if you fancy checking it out. But there we have it, our little benchy is done and printed beautifully. There's a bit of stringing and a few little wisps of filament across some of the finer details, so a quick pass with a blowtorch or a heat gun quickly tidies those up. But it does mean that maybe there's a few areas that we can improve on. Of course, this is just a small test print, so let's move on to something bigger.
So we've set up a little bit of a production line to hopefully process more bottles so we can print something a little bit bigger.
And at this point, some of you might be thinking, hang on a minute, if each bottle only makes a small amount of filament, won't it be a massive faff to keep swapping out rolls every time one runs out?
Well, luckily, our very clever friend Igor is one step ahead and already solved this issue with his second machine, the PET welder, and his sidekick, Mr. Winder. This clever little device allows you to take 2 separate rolls of filament, feed them in from either side, and seamlessly weld them into one continuous piece of filament. And you can keep repeating this process, joining bottle after bottle's worth of filament together until you've got an entire roll, leaving you no reason to have to swap rolls of filament out midway through.
We'll take the lid off so you can see what's happening here, but basically, once you've loaded a roll of filament into each side, the heating element will weld those 2 ends together to give you one continuous roll of filament. Once done, a little fan will cool the plastic back down to solidify the joint, and then it politely sends it out for you to check that you're happy with its work. Then, Mr. Winder does what he does best and winds all of the filament onto the same spool.
So now we can try something a little bit bigger. And we wanted to try something that utilises the slight transparency that comes from these clear plastic bottles, and we figured something like a lamp where the light passes through could be perfect. We found this file for this moon lamp from Bambu Lab's online portal called MakerWorld, and we thought this could absolutely be perfect. But since this is a bit of a longer print and we've already had a very tough day cleaning lots of plastic bottles, we figured we'd leave the printer to do its thing overnight. We're going to go out for some food and a couple of beers and check in tomorrow.
Cheers.
We got very excited. We were all very excited overnight, weren't we? We were all texting each other, what's the moon lamp doing? And we were logging into the printer and I'll show you. Came in this morning and our moon lamp was in 2 pieces. And we think it's down to what?
Moisture.
As many of you will likely know, having moisture in your filament can cause loads of issues with your prints. And since we know that PET as a plastic absorbs moisture really badly, we're expecting that's the culprit here. But fear not, we have a plan.
So this time, instead of going straight from the PETmachine straight into the 3D printer, we're going to dry everything out for a couple of hours, and hopefully that improves things. As you can see, Igor's spirit has not been broken by this minor setback, so neither is ours. But we have run out of filament, so it's time to make some more, and it gives us an opportunity to show us that slightly quieter method of making filament that we mentioned earlier.
So Igor has one of these manual cutters, which is exactly the same as the one on the PETmachine, but just allows you to pre-cut all of your bottles into ribbons before extruding them into filament. Once you've pulled your bottle through, you can just chuck it onto one of these spools and do a fun little rolly arm dance to get it all wound up. Now it's ready to throw back onto the machine to be made into some more filament for Moon Lamp 2.0.
Nice.
We've set our temperature on our oven to about 70 degrees, and we're going to leave it in there for about 3 to 4 hours to hopefully dry everything out.
I really hope that works.
Oh, 2 secs, just got a phone call incoming. Hello?
This is an urgent message regarding your extended fridge warranty.
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. How you doing?
Johnny, hang up the phone.
No, 2 secs, I'm on the phone.
It is about to expire.
I do sound like a young James Bond.
Johnny, it's just an automated marketing call. They've bought your personal information from some data broker.
Oh, I just figured people find me wildly interesting to speak to on the phone.
Well, it definitely isn't that. I used to get them all the time too, but fortunately, the sponsor of today's video, Incogni, solved that problem for me. Come on. Do you ever notice that 1 minute you're Googling or signing up for something, and then the next you're getting a load of spam about that exact same thing? Basically, these companies are selling your personal information to these giant data brokers who then sell it onto other companies who spam you with emails and calls.
So I've literally just signed up to Incogni, and it is wild how much of my personal information is out there. It's already sent out data removal requests to 48 different brokers who are storing my information.
Well, lucky for you, my brother, as well as demanding that your data is removed, Incogni are going to automatically check back in to make sure it stays gone, saving you hours and hours of having to do this yourself manually.
Nailed it. I thought you weren't swallowing.
And it's not just about spam calls. When your data is floating around online, it can be found on people search sites or even used for identity theft. So yeah, not great.
Well, I'm going to miss being able to pretend that I'm super popular, but it sounds like it's for the best.
Because while some things should be recycled, your personal data isn't one of them.
Unfortunately, this isn't just for me. All of you wonderful people can get 60% off an annual Incogni plan using code BROTHERSMAKE down at the link below.
Right, come on, we've got a load of plastic to test and it's your job to do it.
2 secs, Matt, I've just got another call come in. I'll join you in a bit.
Come on.
Yep. Right, that looks dry to us. So here goes take 2.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed. And much better.
This one worked an absolute treat, and it's made a sweet little lamp. You can see a slight colour shift where we've got 2 different types of plastic bottle in the same roll of filament. So what that means is for longer prints, we're going to make sure we use all of the same types of bottles so the colour stays consistent. So the oven worked really well, but we think it's a little bit of a waste of energy to heat up an entire oven just to dry out a small roll of filament. So in true Brothers Make style, we're going to see if there's something else we can find that's a bit more fit for purpose.
And if we're going to try another drying method, we may as well print something else. And we thought, why not try and make something a little bit more practical, something we can use in our day-to-day lives. However, before we do that, sadly, for this trip, our time with Igor has come to an end. So we've got to say goodbye to our PET pal. Cheers, Igor. It's been an absolute blast, you legend. Right, I guess from this point, we're on our own.
Before Igor left, he did give us one little word of wisdom. A food dehydrator works really well for drying out filament. So we had a quick search on Facebook Marketplace and found this secondhand one. It's also perfect because it goes up to 70 degrees Celsius, which is slightly hotter than most standard filament dryers, and it means it's going to do a better job at a slightly quicker pace. And it uses way less energy than heating up our whole oven.
So we made another batch of filament, cue a much shorter montage because, well, you know, you get it by now, and then left it in the dehydrator for about 4 hours. Now for our next print, we wanted to make something that actually ties back to what this whole project is about, turning waste into something useful. So we've chosen a litter picker.
What could be better than turning waste into something that can help us pick up more waste? is perfect. And this one is a much bigger print, taking about 15 hours in total, and it comes in lots of small parts. But it's finally ready, and now comes the fun part of getting all these bits assembled together.
Oh, and while we're here tidying up this little part of our walk to work, if you fancy chatting about how we made this very litter picker, or anything else recycled plastic related, we do have a Patreon. There's a few different tiers to get you things like online hangouts and behind the scenes stuff, so if that sounds like your sort of thing, there's a link down below, but of course, no pressure.
It's actually really good.
And look at that, old plastic waste repurposed and turned into something to pick up more plastic waste. I think we can agree, that's pretty cool.
That is heavy. Genuinely worked so well.
And now we've got this process down, we think we can take things one step further. We've seen how the process works, we've made some practical things, but what about some real-world applications? Could this actually make a difference where it's needed most?
Well, Igor has introduced us to someone that's proving that it absolutely can. This is our wonderful new friend, Kevin. He runs Chiparobo in Kenya, a social enterprise where young people learn about robotics, 3D printing, and now recycling. He's created a space where students can get hands-on with technology and turn their ideas into real products. 3D printed filament in Kenya is super expensive, but plastic bottles are everywhere, so being able to make his own using the PETmachine is a total game changer. He's already using it to make filament for the parts for the robots that his students build, but one of the most amazing ways he's utilising it is to 3D print crutches for those in need. Crutches are also super expensive in Kenya, so good old Igor has designed this 3D printable crutch. So far, Kevin's made them for 6 players on Kenya's national amputee football team, replacing the need for expensive imported crutches with ones made locally, affordably, and now from plastic waste. Kevin's mission is just incredible, giving students the opportunities that he never had and empowering them to create real change, not only for themselves but also for their communities and the environment. And with the PETmachine in the mix, he's not just teaching innovation, he's turning plastic waste into a tool for real-world progress.
All right, well, we'll speak again very soon. Take care, Kevin.
Amazing work, Kevin. We cannot wait to see what you go on to do next. And as those crutches look so cool, we obviously have to have a go at making one ourselves. Igor's kindly sent us the file, so let's give it a go.
This print is going to take a whopping 589 grams of filament, so you know what that means. Don't worry, we're not going to make you watch the whole thing again. But with our new filament drying technique, making sure the plastic is bone dry before it goes into the printer, this thing is coming out awesome. The crutches have been designed in a way to make them as accessible as possible. The main structure is simply just a piece of aluminium tubing, which is something that is found pretty much anywhere in the world. And for the bottom foot, we're using TPU because unfortunately PET doesn't have the flexibility for this, and TPU has just the right level of squish.
We made a second crutch out of PLA because we didn't have quite enough time to make another one out of plastic bottles, and honestly, they are both holding up great. And just to prove how solid this thing is, I'm about 100 kilos and you can see it's holding me absolutely fine.
Yeah.
Nice.
And this is exactly the kind of thing that gets us really excited. Somewhere where plastic is everywhere, but healthcare is really limited. This is absolutely something that could be game-changing. And with innovators like Igor and Kevin leading the charge, this isn't just about recycling, this is real-world impact.
So with everything in mind that we've just gone through, is this a truly sustainable option for 3D printing?
PET bottles are largely recyclable through curbside collection, so does it really make sense to stop that happening to turn them into filament? Or is it better to put it in the recycling bin if that's an option where you live?
To help us get a proper answer, we reached out to someone who definitely knows a thing or two about this.
Morning.
Hello, how you doing?
Hey, Martin.
Not too bad.
Very tropical
Right.
location, you're out there?
Yeah, well, I like to work from the beach.
Lovely.
This is Martin. He's the recycling team leader at the Dorset Council here on the South Coast. where we live. We had a really interesting chat with him about PET recycling, and more specifically about how this process would fit into the general recycling system. So we raised a concern of ours. Since we're only using the middle section of the bottle, that leaves behind the top and the bottom sections. So would those bits get picked up by the general recycling system, or does that mean that they're now unrecyclable?
If these get put in the recycling bin, would they end up recycled in the same way a full bottle would, or are these less likely for that to happen?
Well, the vast majority would get recycled. If it's a plastic and it's a pot towel tray, regardless of whether it's been cut in half or not, then it should in theory get recycled.
So these have got a fairly, as much of a decent chance as a full bottle would, essentially.
Yeah.
Luckily, Martin said that these would still be collected and processed in exactly the same way, which is fantastic news. As a side note, we 3D printed a bin where we're going to be keeping all of our tops and bottoms of our bottles so that we can put these in recycling and make sure they're saved.
Solid, isn't it?
It's a small step, but it helps make the process more sustainable and gives the best chance that every part of the bottle is being put to good use.
Anyway, back to Martin. We then asked about 3D printed parts themselves. If something like a benchy or a lamp was to end up in the system, would these be recyclable? And the answer was no.
Now, rather than plastic type, we keep it quite straightforward. So for plastics, it would be plastic pots, tubs, trays and bottles. Okay. So if a plastic litter bin came in, then it wouldn't be accepted, even if it is of a similar polymer type.
Because the system relies on PET being in a certain format, like a bottle or a pot, for it to be correctly identified and processed, once it's been 3D printed into a new shape, it's effectively reached the end of its life in the general recycling system. So that's something to seriously consider. By turning bottles into filament, we're essentially taking a material that could have gone through multiple curbside recycling loops and locking it into its final form.
But at the same time, there's also a strong argument in favour of it. In places where curbside recycling isn't available, this is a fantastic way to reuse plastic that essentially is littering our planet. Turning this material into something useful and potentially even life-changing. And even in countries where recycling is really common, by making your own filament out of plastic waste, you are actively reducing the demand for new filament to be made out of virgin materials. So in that sense, there's still an environmental benefit. Ultimately, there's no real clear-cut answer. It depends on where you live and how you're using the material. But what do you guys think? Does it make sense to turn PET into filament, or is it better to let it go through traditional recycling routes? We would love to hear any of your thoughts.
What is certain though is that in the right places with the right people driving it forward, like Igor and Kevin and so many others, this technology has incredible potential. Thank you so much for watching the video, and a huge thank you goes out to Igor for taking the time to come and visit us and teach us so much about PET recycling. We've included links below for his wonderful machines, so be sure to check them out. And as always, an almost undefinably big shout out goes to the Brotherhood over on Patreon. Thank you so much for doing everything you do, and a particular shout out to our top supporters, Jessica Greer and Elizabeth from Trash Club Brooklyn. Thank you so much for watching.